Before, it debuted at the festival, it wasn't even known as Sundance yet.
Sundance feels, even to this day, a place for discoveries.
But that wasn't the assignment, was it?
Greetings, one and all, and welcome to ScreenRant's Challenge My Goat. My name is Todd Gilchrist, and I will be your guide through this odyssey of independent cinema. This week's topic is the greatest Sundance film of all time. Our expert today is ScreenRant senior film critic Greg Newson, who I think leaves tomorrow for the 2026 Sundance Film Festival. What is the film that you think is the greatest Sundance film in the history of this iconic festival?
I went with Steven Soderbergh's feature debut, Sex, Lies, and Videotape from 1989.
Our challenger this week is Screen International senior U.S. critic Tim Grierson. Tim, what film would you pick instead of Sex, Lies, and Videotape as the greatest Sundance film in the history of the festival?
I would go with 1994's Hoop Dreams, directed by Steve James, which I think is one of the great documentaries of all time.
Well, listen, I don't want to hold either of you back. So, Greg, Greg, you go first and tell us your thoughts about what makes this the ultimate Sundance film.
Yeah, well, I was looking for a film that I felt was both had clearly been canonized, has solidified its place in the canon of American cinema, but also one that has more or less become it feels to me like a movie that has established what Sundance currently is, like the way that we consider Sundance in its place in the global film festival market, like what distinguishes itself from Cannes or Venice or even New York. So because of its influence on both the festival and on the American indie cinema world and community, that's more or less why I chose the film. I think it's a great film, but I also think that it is historically significant in terms of how it established Sundance for what it is. Before it debuted at the festival, it wasn't even known as Sundance yet. What Soderbergh went on to be nominated for with this film, the fact that he became the youngest filmmaker ever to, or I should say feature filmmaker ever to win the Palme d'Or at the age of 26 years old. I think a lot of that really put Sundance on the map. And, we currently, like this year, this coming festival, 40% of the features at Sundance are by first-time filmmakers. And I think films like Sex, Lies, and Videotape helped create that defining goalpost for the festival as a place that continuously platforms first-time filmmakers and filmmakers from underrepresented backgrounds, etc. So yeah, that's why it's my choice.
You make a strong case. There are so many, of course, classic films. I mean, both box office and, sort of critical faves, Four Lions, Memento. There's all these films. What made for you Hoop Dreams the one that you feel was worthy of battling against Sex, Lies, and Videotape?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I totally agree with Greg that I think what makes Sundance really sort of stand out as opposed to, say, Cannes or Venice or some of the other places that Greg mentioned is that Sundance feels, even to this day, a place for discoveries, that you go in and maybe you have some ideas of some certain films that you're curious about seeing, but then you are just shocked by something that you weren't expecting. And Sex, Lies, and Videotape absolutely falls into that category. For me, when I picked Hoop Dreams, I was thinking kind of like, sounds like, Greg, that you were thinking about not just a great film, but something that sort of represents something about Sundance. And so really briefly, I want to talk about the movies I also thought about, but then decided not to do, because I was thinking about Blair Witch Project in terms of something that speaks to a certain era of Sundance and discovery and launching frankly, a genre of horror movies that became popular because of it. I thought of Boyhood, the Richard Linklater film, which premiered there, that not a lot of people knew about before it was announced for the festival. It was such a big deal, and was sort of the first really big Sundance movie that got a ton of Oscar nominations. I would have loved if it actually had won that year. It would have been the first Sundance premiere to ever win Best Picture at the Oscars. But I decided on Hoop Dreams for a couple of reasons. One, because I actually, as much as I love those other movies, I decided, and I like Sex Lies and Videotape a ton as well. Hoop Dreams is, I think, my favorite film that's ever premiered at Sundance. I didn't see it at Sundance. But I think it speaks to the things that mean the most to me about Sundance, because it was not a movie going in that a lot of people knew much about. Somewhat famously, Siskel and Ebert on their show really championed the movie before it played at the festival because they had seen it ahead of time. And it became sort of a discovery at the festival. It got distribution, even though it was 3 hours long, and will people see a 3 hour long movie in the theater? It was actually kind of a commercial. Isn't that funny, by the way, to think about that now? Like, a 3 hour movie. Will anybody actually sit through that? And that is another thing I think that Hoop Dreams, in terms of why it's not just a great movie, but sort of an important and sort of paradigm shifting movie, is it's this idea of, no, people will sit and watch a quote unquote long movie if it is as engrossing as Hoop Dreams is. William and Arthur, the two sort of main subjects of the film, who are going through high school simultaneously. They both are sort of pursuing their dreams of eventually getting to the NBA. That movie, to this day, remains as suspenseful, as dramatically engaging, with two of the most moving subjects, fiction or nonfiction. But the other reason why I also picked it is, Sundance for decades has had lots of impressive international and world cinema debuts, but I think it's still thought of as an American festival. It's mostly thought of as a launching spot for American independent cinema. And to my mind, beyond just being a great film, I think Hoop Dreams is an incredible American saga. It's such about this country and the culture in terms of haves and have-nots, the way education is sort of looked at in this country, the way sports are valued in this country. The movie is now more than 30 years old, but I don't think that the main things that the movie is talking about, none of that has become antiquated. It's all very, very, very real. And the fact that Steve James and his creative partners thought it was going to be a half an hour documentary when they started. And then they fell into this story and just kept filming and filming and filming. And just my last thing is, I think it created this really fascinating question that we still talk about in terms of cinema, which is, who has the right to tell other people's stories? Steve James and his colleagues are white. They told the stories of two Black high school athletes and their families. And I think that Steve James did such a beautiful job with it. But that began, I think, a conversation that we're still having about telling other people's stories. Yeah. And the responsibility and the care you have to give when you're telling that type of story. So I think that for all those reasons, that's why I went with Hoop Dreams.
Greg, I'm curious if you have any feelings about the difference between these two films, among many other things, the fact that Tim chose a documentary as opposed to a narrative feature. If that's something that you feel like for you is the narrative aspect of Sex, Lies, and Videotape is sort of, inherent in maybe one of its sort of chief merits in the particular framework of this discussion.
I was, I guess, mostly looking at fiction, and I looked at a lot of those same films that Tim had mentioned. I also thought about Get Out, so also it was like so recent. I don't know if that necessarily feels like it's a film that has established the festival in some way, but certainly obviously has had a lasting impact. But I think I also was thinking about the longevity and the particular quality of Soderbergh's output since then, and that he started in this kind of fabled way where he was working for Sundance, I guess, maybe the season before. I'm not exactly sure the timeline, but he was an anonymous van driver, and that he then became this filmmaker with a huge mega global hit, at least in the art house world. And that he then went on to make several huge commercial hits like the Ocean's 11 trilogy, and Traffic, of course, which was like his big like awards film, and now is kind of almost returned to this like earlier stage of his career where he's as I've written before, like kind of gamified his own approach to filmmaking. He's kind of just doing a new thing every time. And so the fact that he has stuck around and continued to pave his own path, I think so much of that is just directly traceable to this one moment where he struck gold and was able to insert himself into a larger conversation about filmmaking in general, but also, the film is made at the start of George H.W. Bush's presidency, on the heels of Reagan's presidency. America is very much like a conservative country at this point, and he makes this movie that's about a very frank film about sexual impotency and maybe the falsehood of the American dream, which I think is something that very much it shares with Hoop Dreams. These are two films that are pretty stark visions of this, behemoth idea that you can just like come here and do whatever the hell you want, and you can be successful as long as you try hard. Both of these films are really radical in the way that they upend this popular notion of what this country can afford you, because even though Peter Gallagher's character is super successful and he's a new junior partner at his law firm, and they have this like gorgeous, perfect ideal of the American suburban dream, underneath that, and actually in a similar way to like David Lynch did with Blue Velvet, it's all kind of fake, and and he does it in this way that is so uncomfortable for an audience in 1989 that is not used to something so naked, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so I think part of the reason why I'm drawn to this film for this like question of what's the greatest, Sundance. Obviously, I think this podcast is going to just turn into Tim and I just fawning over each other's movies probably a little bit, but rather than a traditional debate. I don't have a hot take about Hoop Dreams, unfortunately. But as Tim was saying, it's this festival of discovery, and I think also a festival that has made a name for itself as a place where you are challenged really to see both the industry and the world in a very different way. And I think Sex, Lies, and Videotape did that on both a socio-political way and also in a industry way.
Tim, do you have anything to add to that? Those thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I hadn't thought about sort of the connection between the two movies in terms of like themes. I mean, it definitely feels like capitalism is very much at the center of both movies, but in kind of different ways. I think also like with Sex, Lies, it's a movie that really launches a career, and obviously Hoop Dreams did too for Steve James. But like Sex, Lies, what's also for me part of that story in terms of Sundance is somebody is discovered and then they go on and have this remarkable career. Neither of us mentioned Reservoir Dogs, which is another one that very much falls into that category.
I've been sitting over here waiting. I'm like, Reservoir Dogs. Because
it's this idea of it's not just, and those are kind of the happy stories, I would say. These films that it launches a filmmaker and then they go on and have a remarkable career after that. I'm not going to sit here and mention the films that were sort of discovered at Sundance and then the filmmakers for whatever reason, it just never worked out for them to have a lengthy career. But someone like Soderbergh, someone like Tarantino, someone like Kevin Smith, these are people you can
Nolan,
you can point to people and say that's sort of where it started. That's where it really kind of began. And I think when younger filmmakers, Rian Johnson falls into this category. Brick premieres at Sundance. It gets a special award for creative audacity, I think was the prize that Ryan got for that movie. That launches a career. But I think when younger
Damien Chazelle, sorry to interrupt, but
you're right. There's so many that fall into this category, and I think that is. I think young filmmakers, especially young American filmmakers, the idea of going to Cannes is almost like that's 4 or 5 steps away, or going to Venice or something like that. But going to Sundance feels attainable. Neil LaBeouf, who did In the Company of Men, basically was inspired to make the movie. He'd been writing plays and stuff like that, but he was inspired to make that movie because he had heard just how little money Rodriguez spent to do El Mariachi, and thought, well, I can use my credit cards and make a movie, and then that movie premieres at Sundance. I think Sundance still feels like an entryway for people who are filmmakers and starting out to be discovered and to have their dreams come true. And I think in that way, which I think especially true of Sex, Lies, and Videotape, is that was the first model of what was possible to do that. And then you have the Kevin Smiths and the Quentin Tarantinos, all these people who came after that. But Soderbergh is kind of the origin story of that dream of Sundance being this thing for filmmakers. And
you're making a really strong case for Greg. Good job.
Well, I think the only thing I would say against Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which I like a lot, is I just feel like Soderbergh's made better films.
Oh, definitely. If we put these films in an island, I think devoid of their context, I think it's very easy, and certainly I might even make the argument that Hoop Dreams has more of a longer term cultural impact or whatever. But that wasn't the assignment, was it? We were supposed to consider the context.
Well, I will be selfish and give my own film a few flowers. I think that, and especially this past Sundance, that was very strong in terms of documentaries. I think Sundance, year after year, is a really, really good festival for documentaries. We had The Perfect Neighbor, we had The Alabama Solution, we had Predators, we had Zodiac Killer Project, all of these films, and I know I'm forgetting a few others. There were documentaries, the Marley Matlin doc. There were a lot of things that launched out of Sundance.
Seeds.
Yes, Seeds. There's so many. There were so many. It was a really exceptionally strong year for documentaries this past year. But that's not necessarily an exception. I think Sundance often does have a lot of great documentaries that really sort of start that conversation throughout the rest of the year in terms of documentaries. And so for me, Hoop Dreams is still kind of the class act of that section of films, because I think we're talking about independent cinema and we're talking about mostly in terms of narrative. But I feel like as the narrative independent world has become more and more challenged, the documentary world is even more challenged, even more so. Like, I have friends who are in the documentary world who say, basically it's celebrities, cults, or crime. It's the 3 C's. Those are the documentaries that if you make them, you might get them to play on Netflix or something like that.
Especially if it has an aspect of all 3, then you're really in the money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Hoop Dreams is not any of those. It does not do any of those. It is about, that movie, I think, set the template in terms of people realizing if you just have incredible subjects who you care about so passionately, you'll watch them to the ends of the earth. The movie was 3 hours long, but it flies by. I would say that my favorite film of 2025, which is the documentary My Undesirable Friends, very much falls still in that template of mean, that movie was 5.5 hours long, and people are like, that's a long movie. But I argue that you care about those people so much, you want to keep watching. You care about them so passionately. There's a trust the filmmaker builds, just like in Hoop Dreams, and you get to see these people living their lives. Hoop Dreams was not the first documentary to ever do that, but in terms of the Sundance world, I feel like it was. And so that's another reason why that movie means so much to me.
It also, I mean, Hoop Dreams is so wonderful because it is it's so up. I mean, you as you said, you fall in love with these subjects, and they succeed not because of this old fangled idea of the American dream, but almost in spite of it. And so it accomplishes on two tracks. I think it has that kind of that sports doc quality that people crave. They want to root for the team, they want to root for the players and have that buzzer beater moment or whatever. But it also is very much pulling the curtain back on it. I think an institution in the NCAA, and not just NCAA, but like the sports recruiting worlds more broadly, that a lot of people had suspected, I suppose, that was not entirely kosher. And
right.
And with a doc like that, it lays it out into stark reality, but not in a way that you're rooting against what you're seeing on the screen.
Yeah, and I would also say, and I think this is true of a lot of movies that you love, but when I first saw that movie, I was closer to the age of William and Arthur, the high school kids. And now when I watch the movie, I'm much closer to the age of their parents, the teachers, and you see the movie in a different way, not in a better or worse way, but it's almost as if the perspective is shifted 180 degrees. And now you look at them as, oh my God, these kids who are just following their dream and understanding and caring, at least speaking for myself, being more invested in the parents. Because that's the other thing, the movie spend so much time with the parents and the adults in these people's lives, and you get to know them too. And so it's a movie that as I get older, I see different ways of thinking about the film. And I would also say, as a sports guy, sometimes I will suggest movies, sports movies, to my movie loving friends who are not sports people.
This was me this year with EFIS. I kept going, you got to watch EFIS. EFIS is amazing. Yes, it's a baseball movie. But
right.
but it's really more than that. It's more than that.
No, Greg, I spend so many times saying like, I know, but I promise you don't have to care about baseball. And Hoop Dreams is one of those movies. I feel like I don't feel like you need to care that much about basketball or be into basketball, though it is fascinating, I have to say, that people like Andrew Garfield, who's just really into the NBA, that's one of his favorite movies. He like talks about Hoop Dreams as often as he possibly can. But I do feel like it's a movie that you don't have to be a sports person, a sports junkie, because it's such a human story. And I hate using the expression a human story, but it really is. And you do get wrapped up in these.
It's funny that we feel the need to do that with sports, but not with any other profession. Like you would never say, you don't have to be a doctor to enjoy the pit. It's like, well,
right.
You don't have to be a doctor to enjoy the pit, but you also definitely don't have to be a basketball fan to enjoy a basketball documentary. It is particular to sports in that way, it seems.
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, I just say it's a whole other conversation, but that is definitely a thing where I think certain people just have an allergy to sports stuff because they're not interested in sports. They didn't like sports growing up, and they feel like,
yeah, it reminds them of a bullying time in their lives or whatever it is.
1,000%. And Lord knows sports take up so much bandwidth in the culture anyway, that they're just like, do I have to watch a 3-hour movie about this? I kind of want to avoid this. But I find it intensely moving. And I'll just say its final line, which I won't spoil for people who haven't seen the movie, is a line that has haunted me since I saw it back in 94. The idea of like, the future and what if you don't reach your dreams and things like that. I think it's such a profound, beautiful, beautiful film.
Well, listen, this has been such a great discussion that quite frankly, I'd just be more than happy to just listen, and then every once in a while go, yeah, but Reservoir Dogs. Listen, as we're sort of wrapping, where can people follow you because I know, Tim, you're also going to Sundance, right?
Yes, I'm going in a couple days for the last one in Park City and the first one for the first one since Robert Redford died. I think it's going to be a really emotional, bittersweet festival in a lot of ways. And I'm curious, and Greg, you probably feel the same way. I'm curious how that will impact the reaction to movies, because I think it's going to be so emotionally charged. I'm curious what movies will resonate perhaps more because of that bittersweet quality going into it.
Well, where can people follow you during each of you during the festival?
So, like you mentioned, I'm senior U.S. critic for Screen International. I will be on Blue Sky by my name, Tim Grierson, Grierson. I still throw things on X. It's like throwing them into a toxic black hole, but I do have some friends who are still on there, and so I want to respect them. But my reviews will be running throughout the festival over at Screen International.
And Greg, aside from at ScreenRant, on what social platforms?
Shockingly, I'll be on ScreenRant. I'm also on Blue Sky at Gregory Nussen, Nussen, or I guess I'll be posting a little bit on Instagram, maybe. Who knows? You can find me on Letterboxd also at Gregory Nussen. I am not on X. And I guess that's it. Yeah.
Great. Well, listen, if anyone listening disagrees with our GOAT selections, head over to ScreenRant.com to our Challenge My GOAT article series and let us know your pick in the comments. And if you make a compelling argument for something other than either of these two films or Reservoir Dogs, we may read it on the show next week. Thank everyone so much for joining today. Thank you both, Greg and Tim. And thanks a lot for listening.